All right, everyone, what's up? We are back for once again. This is what the third or fourth one this week. Polymath Salon online. Today we're joined by Willem Nielsen from the Wolfram Institute as he presents a case study on engineering and innovation, inspired by his recent essay with Stephen Wolfram, the man himself. We actually do have multiple members of the Wolfram Institute here today. You want to start with Michael? Quick intro.
So I am Michael Ostroff. I'm a PhD physics student at FAU, and I'm also an affiliated researcher with the Wolfram Institute. So I mainly research general relativity and complex systems, but as a polymath, my interests are a bit more general than that. Regarding general relativity, I'm researching a specific case of it, which I refer to as dimensional collapsar theory, which has these structures which I refer to as dimensional collapsars, which essentially bridge general relativity and Kaluza-Klein theory. That's a brief gist of my research.
All right, Eli, quick intro maybe.
Yeah, sure. My name is Eli Gray. I'm a generalist researcher, just trying to make the world better. And in terms of what I do, doing a lot of things, obviously, generalist. But one thing that's really relevant to this talk is making new engineering principles or starting from first principles to solve problems that you don't realize exist. And I work on privacy enforcement stuff at the moment. And when I joined the privacy company I joined, they're like, oh, do all these things that all these companies do. But instead I was like, well, I'm going to make a firewall that hijacks all network requests and just like make it so we can have a nuclear band-aid for privacy enforcement. And coming through it from those first principles and thinking about the problem from a different perspective really made a really awesome product. So it's pretty fun. And now my product's on about 1% of the internet. So it's really cool. And I like to approach more problems that way. So love to see what else is going on in this.
Awesome. I think especially with what you just said, I think you'd have a lot of cool stuff to say about some of the ideas that are going to be talked about in the salon today. Because I do think there is something about that kind of, I know it's sort of become cringy, but like sort of the first principles generalist approach. I think there is something kind of special about that. So I totally welcome anything you have to say about that. And then we have lastly another Wolfram Institute researcher, Dugan Hammock. Want to give an intro?
Yes, thanks. Dugan, I work at the Wolfram Institute as a researcher, and my background is in mathematics, geometry. I specialize in four-dimensional visualization and aperiodic tilings.
Awesome. And you can actually check out one of his recent presentations at UT Austin that we did for a Polymath Salon on the YouTube channel for Ekkolapto. That'll be in the description of the video. Great video. Scott Aronson also presented and had a long discussion on that, which is also on the channel. I think at this point it has what? Is it not? No, it's 10K. It's 10,000 views, which is great. So make sure everyone watches that one. Yes, I'm Addy from Ekkolapto. I'm the person, sometimes human, that does this. They're fun. They're pretty cool and interesting. And then lastly, Willem, who is our lead speaker for today. Give a quick intro and then let's rock and roll.
Yeah. Thanks, Addy. So my name is Willem, obviously. I'm a research fellow at the Wolfram Institute working on minimal computational models, mainly for biological systems. But in this case, we are studying more engineering systems. This is based on recent work with Stephen Wolfram, looking at a case study of engineering and innovation. Specifically, we looked at the game of life. So most studies of engineering and innovation are like, you can imagine doing, looking at data sets about, for example, like automobiles and how they've progressed over time. Or, the other thing people do is like paper citations and how that, scientific progress is made over time. But Stephen had this idea, which was to just look at the game of life. And it's nice because it's just all bits. And so it's very minimal case study. And because of that, you can kind of really dig into the details and like see how the actual structures progress over time, which is interesting. So I'm just going to jump right in. I mean, the game of life specifically is a 2D cellular automata. So it's just a grid of cells and you evolve it over time. And so one way to visualize it is just a video like this. And already you can see it kind of looks like engineering. And this one was actually built kind of by one of the famous people who works in Game of Life named Bill Gosper, but we'll get into more of that. But before, I just want to go through some different kind of visualizations. So most of Wolfram's work is in one-dimensional cellular automata, but Game of Life is actually two-dimensional. And I should say it was invented back in the 60s by this guy named John Conway. And it's kind of like a typical class 4 system. So a lot of complexity kind of is capable in just this rule. Yeah, so different ways to visualize it. So we can see on this left panel, it's kind of like trails, or instead of showing a video, we're just representing time as like these kind of orange trails. So that's one way to see what's going on. And then we can also do like a 3-dimensional where we put time on the y-axis going downwards. And so then we can kind of see like the behavior of the system a little bit better. So we can see like those, what are called gliders, are kind of shooting off there. And then the last one is just like a side view of the 3D. So those are some visualizations that we'll use to kind of see what's going on with the behavior. So I want to talk about what's been made in the Game of Life. So we have one of the areas of study that's been done a lot are these things called oscillators, and it's kind of, they do what they sound like. So they're just kind of like periodic patterns that repeat. And that's one of the areas that's been explored a lot. So these are just kind of very common oscillators in the Game of Life. And then the other kind of big area of interest is these things called gliders, and they just move across the page instead of kind of just, repeating. And then there's a bunch more complex structures. So this is another. So what I showed.
Can you go back one? I had a question.
Yeah. Go ahead.
All right. So I was just looking at the glider and then the lightweight spaceship. Is that made out of 2 gliders that are like kind of next to each other?
No, I don't think so. But I think it's just kind of like a different pattern, right? Yeah. Yeah. Does that answer it, or?
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. So, so a lot of complex structures have been made in the Game of Life. This is another example of a glider gun, which was also the first thing I showed, which it just means that instead of oscillating or just moving across the page, it kind of grows forever and kind of creates gliders basically and shoots them out. And so that was kind of like one of the big first discoveries that was made back in, I think it was the 60s or 70s. Yeah. Any questions on that?
60s or 70s. So that's pretty early. I mean, are they doing this by hand, or is this computer system back?
Yeah, good question. So actually they were originally doing it on a Go board. And they would just have some guy, simulate what would happen, which was obviously pretty like slow. But yeah, so once they started doing computers, then it was much easier, obviously. But yeah, like I said, the Bill Gosper was the guy who discovered this original one. It's called a Gosper glider gun. Yeah, a lot of the names are pretty funny too.
I'm really curious about like how old the very first computers we used to simulate this stuff was. Like, I had no idea how initially we were just doing this all by hand.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Yeah, I don't know that much about the history. So when I was working on this, it was me, Stephen Wolfram, and then this guy named Ed Pegg, who knows a lot about the Game of Life and was like kind of like involved from way back then. So he was kind of like addressing the Game of Life questions, and then I was doing a lot of the like coding stuff. But yeah, it will be interesting to learn more. There's a whole like Discord on the Game of Life that has a ton of resources. Yeah, so now that I kind of like went over the basics of the Game of Life, I want to talk about like what we can actually study within it, right? So one of the things we looked at kind of extensively was this idea of modularity of the pattern. So what we're showing here is similar to the other plots, but that any time that there's a causal separation in one of the parts, meaning that you can run them without running the other ones, like they don't influence each other, then we show that as like a separation.
As in they're somewhat independent.
Sorry, say it again.
As in they're somewhat independent of each other.
Yeah, completely independent, like causally, so they don't affect at that step, they don't affect each other. And then, when they join together, that means that now they can have the potential to influence each other again. So basically what it's showing is that when there's a lot of different branches in the graph, it means that it's a more modular system. And when it's kind of just one blob, it'll show more like just a kind of linear graph. So what we can do is take this idea, and this is just the same graph without showing the patterns, and we can use it or visualize it for different patterns, and try to get a sense of how modular are these different systems. And what's interesting is we can kind of make this distinction between some system that's been invented by explicit human engineering and something that's been discovered by like exhaustive search on a computer. So for example, these are period 9 oscillators, and the ones that were explicitly engineered. So for example, these three first ones were all engineered, and you can see that they have like branches and kind of different parts in their pattern. And then these two here were found, actually I should say, I'm sure that this one was found by exhaustive search. So it's just one straight kind of node down. And the reason is because when humans are kind of engineering things, they need to have kind of different parts where they can make predictions about what those parts are going to do. But when you have one big blob like this, it's really hard to predict what it's going to do. And because of that, you wouldn't know from looking at it that it's going to be a period 9 oscillator, right? So in kind of having this really formal model for an engineered system, we can draw this nice distinction. Yeah. Any questions?
I like this a lot. We'll get back to this later towards the end because I have stuff I want to come.
So
Okay,
all these is this showing the periodicity, like the vertical axis on all these diagrams is the time.
Yeah.
And for each time slice, you're like breaking up what's there into like different components if it can be decomposed into components.
Exactly.
Okay. So like the fourth one being like a straight thing, it's like it goes from these. It's a sequence of blobs, and those blobs can't be decomposed. It's just a single.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
So that indicates that it was probably not made by humans, or it's at least not modular.
It's not modular, and this 1997 one was not made by humans. It was found in a search.
Yeah. And if it was made by humans, it was found by humans in much the same way. Like, because there's no modularity to it. You can't like construct it.
Right.
Parts. It's like.
Yeah, so I don't know if any of these, like, so that's a good point. I mean, some of the ones that are like a single blob are found by humans, but usually it's just the algorithm that causally separates the patterns, isn't as good as the quote unquote engineers who built the pattern. Meaning, like, so for example, in this one, like this is a known kind of thing, right? This is the strict still life. And so, the trained eye or whatever could pull apart this pattern into different parts, if that makes sense. But the point is that as a general kind of heuristic, the explicitly engineered ones tend to be more modular, and the exhaustive search tend to be less so. What's interesting is because, again, it's a minimal system, we can also just look at kind of the adaptive version. So what this is we're using the same game of life cellular automata rules. We're starting from these random initial conditions, and then we're kind of tweaking the initial conditions to try to get a longer and longer halting length, right? And so what this is just sequences in that evolution. And what's interesting is you can see that the resulting patterns are much fuzzier than the engineered ones. They're much more messy and complicated, presumably similar to biological systems that are also adapted by a similar kind of iterative process. And this is just showing more examples of game of life patterns that were found by adaptive search to have some long halting length.
So these do halt at the end?
Yeah, so these are halting.
They fizzle out and they stop.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Dugan, do you remember our conversation on the geometry of motion? Like if you were to look at everything as one frame, right? Isn't this interesting to sort of see the duration and the, in a sense, lifespan of these systems and the shapes that they make?
Oh yeah, for sure.
I feel like there's something to formalize there. Like there could be more to look into potentially.
Yeah, no, that's interesting about the geometry. I definitely have thought about that. But okay, so kind of zooming out a bit now, so we can also look at the kind of arc of progress or innovation within the game of life. So what this is showing is just a number of patterns at each year that were discovered. And again, you can kind of see the waves of activity. So this spike here in the 2020s is because of COVID. But presumably similar to other fields of like science, for example, you kind of have waves of interest and waves of discovery. Which is interesting to see that also here in the game of life. Another thing you can look at for innovation is these kind of winner-take-all effects. So this is showing the concentration of discoveries across different people. So it's showing the kind of the people that have made the most discoveries in the game of life. And what's interesting is that presumably similar to how something like wealth concentrates, we have most of the discoveries concentrate among a select few. Potentially because once you've kind of made a bunch of discoveries, you're more likely to make more because whatever, you have the resources or the intelligence or whatever. So it's kind of fitting like a power law, similar to like the Pareto principle, for example. And kind of a similar take on that is you can look at the frequency of parts within the patterns. And again, most of the there's a handful of parts that are by far the most frequent. So like this is like the R pentamino, which gets used a bunch in the different patterns. This is like the strict still life. This is the glider. And this is kind of showing that same idea over time. So what we're looking at is the red kind of section of the bars is the number of patterns that were found where the parts are completely new. So there's no reuse of old parts. And the blue is when you do reuse the parts. So it's, to me, the way I see this is kind of like in the early 70s, basically all the parts that were going to be discovered pretty much got discovered. The kind of the primitive parts. And then from there, most of the new discoveries were just building on those and just using the same parts to make new configurations, basically. So, and I kind of see it like similar to how, like in the kind of the embryonic phase of software, for example, in the beginning of the computer revolution, you kind of have this phase of competition where, there's a bunch of companies jarring for, the market of software, and then you kind of have a few winners, and then like Apple and Microsoft, etc., and then those kind of software systems, everything gets built on top of them. That's kind of the analogy
In a
I
sense,
like to
they're
think about for
foundational
this one.
almost.
Right, exactly. And I think this pattern of having these kind of this embryonic phase where you have these, there's a lot of different potential ways that the system can go, and then it kind of solidifies. So like, for example, I think about it like in biology where you kind of had, something like DNA, where there was kind of a window of opportunity for an information molecule, and then DNA kind of won out basically, and then from that time on, everything kind of uses that to make, different organisms. Or I'm blanking on the name, but what is it called when like the Burgess Shale, when there's a bunch of different organisms that cropped up? Oh yeah, the Cambrian explosion. Yeah, so it's like I see it like that, where there's a bunch of variation in the possible organisms, and then kind of the window narrowed, and then there was a few won out, and then everything kind of got built on top of those, like vertebrates, for example. So just to kind of summarize or wrap up, I think one of the takeaways you could have is, in studying the game of life, we kind of have this really nice formalization for what is an engineered system. And what we can see is it's kind of taking this computational irreducible system like the game of life, and kind of bounding it and shaping it to get it to do, you know, what the human objective is, or get it to do what we want it to do. So and you know, with that formalization, we can kind of begin to study certain things like what happens when we perturb an engineered system as a model for like computer security, and how does the behavior change when we perturb it. So yeah, I think that's kind of one potential big takeaway from this. But you know, there's a lot more actually, and the post is really in depth. Steven's pretty thorough. So if you're interested, maybe Addie could link it or something, and yeah, you should go check it out. But other than that, thank you so much. You know, obviously Steven, you know, worked a ton on this. I mostly helped, and then Ed, as I mentioned, was, you know, big in terms of the game of life knowledge. And then these other two guys, David Green and Matthias Merzenich, they're actually big in the game of life community, and they helped us, you know, with their expertise there. So, and also thank you guys for listening.
Awesome. Thank you,
yeah.
Willem. I actually did want to have a couple of things real quick before we get to more questions and comments. Feel free to talk a little bit more about this if you want. If there's any certain ideas that you have that you want to sort of get some bouncing off of, any kind of speculation, theorizing, like, feel free.
Yeah, sure. I mean, let's take questions, and maybe I can pull up some of the posts and talk about
Yeah,
it.
so I had a question about this plot specifically. So this is
Yeah.
showing like the frequency of different structures.
Yeah.
Is this the frequency? Like, what is this measuring the frequency of? Exactly.
Sorry, let me go back
Like
to it.
the propensity for these things to like prop up and
Yeah. Yeah.
come
So
alive?
basically, we just run an algorithm that searches for that pattern, or I should say sub pattern within the larger pattern, and the number of times and all of the, you know, all of the patterns in the data set that, for example, the R pentomino in, you know, in point, what is that? 0.1, 0.5. Yeah, something like 0.5% of the patterns, the R pentomino is in there.
Uh-huh. Okay, so like half. Oh, this is that's frequency. So it's saying like 10% or 20% or 50%.
Yeah, you're right. It's 20%. It's 20% of all patterns. The R pentomino is within it.
And is that looking for the pattern like by itself, like isolated by like a buffer, or
Yes, that's a good question, and I think so, but I'd have to double check the code. I mean, maybe we can see it right here. Yeah, we got it from this actually, so I would have to double check the code. But yeah, that's a good point. I think that there's definitely more to be done here, because it was pretty difficult to isolate out the parts, and oftentimes there'll be, like I said, human recognizable distinct parts, but it's hard to algorithmically distinguish them, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And this is looking at a data set of just like randomly started seeds, and then letting them run, and then like start doing the pattern search.
Did you say adaptive?
Random seeds. Like where was it? Like the data set is generated how?
Okay, so the data set, so the game of life is really just a set of cellular automata rules, and all these patterns, the difference is their initial condition. So they're all the same rules. Yeah. And the ones that are in the data set are just ones that the game of life community considered to be significant, or considered to be like, you know, worthy of putting in the data set, right?
No, you're good. And then Eli, because before I start.
No, me neither, but it's still an interesting talk. I'm probably gonna go to all of every one of these things you guys have.
Yeah, we'll attach everything. I can actually put it in the chat, but I'll obviously, for the YouTube videos, I always try to link everything. But you know, actually, so Willem, couple things. So this is maybe not as much of a question as much as it is sort of an idea or a thought. Mm-hmm. But I think, even in other salons, I think a lot about, problem solving mechanisms and systems, right? And I think about, what type of, let's just say you kind of rewind human history back, right? And, I think this is also independent of just humans. I think this is just life in general. But what type of problem would you have to be solving where you come up with the field of chemistry or the field of physics or philosophy or math or biology or neuroscience or whatever, right?
Mhm.
And, one thing that I've realized in sort of trying to more deeply understand the foundations of training, behavior, education, agency, all these things is that I think that, we call things chemistry and physics or whatever because of the types of problems that we're trying to solve. And, in a sense, like the oldest version of chemistry in a lot of ways was like cooking, right? Like you were probably trying to preserve your food or maybe clean your body or clean things or do whatever. I mean, there's all sorts of things that you could have technically considered to be like a proto-chemistry, right? But a lot of this depends on how you want to control the system. You want to control the system over a certain scale in space and in time. And I think in some ways, depending on the scale you're acting, that looks like chemistry, right? And then you could say below chemistry is sort of physics. Below physics, who knows what else is there, right? But if you kind of go up in these layers, you start to get things that represent, you could say more higher agency systems. You start to get things that we call minds, right? What did Eli say? I believe that realizing the existence of problems that are usually too large to properly recognize is where major innovation systems come from. Well, I mean, this also ties into, Eli, I think this also ties into like, I think, it's Michael Levin, I think calls this like mind blindness, right? The
Yeah,
ability
that's
to
a great one.
not necessarily see mind, cognition, agency in systems that would have some kind of thing. And actually, I'll diverge for a second, and I'll try not to diverge too much after that. But there was this thing I did a while back where I had made a presentation for something, and it was like just sped up video of like Earth time lapses, like things of like the clouds and the ocean and whatever, and like rocks moving and whatever, just random things you'd consider inanimate. If you speed it up enough, that starts to look like a living system. You can see the thing that's causing it to move this way over this time and all that kind of stuff. And it's like that. It's an interesting idea as to what cognition is and what behavior is and all that kind of stuff, right? About when you mess with those time scales, right? Like there's a lot of things that are happening, like even just in your life right now that are too slow for you to see until you look at it in hindsight. Right. And so there's this sort of sweet spot of the way things progress throughout time that we consider, oh, it's moving, it's dynamic, maybe it has some kind of behavior. Right. And then now I think this also ties back into the way that we categorize these fields in the first place, because, I think about like a lot, the language that we're using, the fields that we've created or whatever are sort of to an extent human concepts and things. Right. Another kind of organism might have a different way of thinking about it and solving the problem. Right. And then now this gets me to a bigger question about problem solving in nature. Right. And it's like, how do you have two organisms coming from very different places that end up converging on the same thing, convergent evolution? But why is that possible? Is it's because there's some kind of shared goal? They're solving similar kinds of problems. Right. And then you also have to identify, if you're talking about goals, goal orientedness is, as some people would say, is where do the goals come from? And so I guess now maybe leading into a question for Willem, at least to an extent, is what are the ways, not necessarily, okay, let's phrase it this way. Not what are the ways that, human and computational systems and nature would solve problems. How do they all differ from each other? How do they identify a problem worth solving and a goal in the first place? And I think we've talked a little bit about this before.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I think Stephen's like main point on this, and I kind of agree with it, is that, most of the time it's about figuring out what the right question is. And
Right.
that's kind of just for us as humans to decide. And it's not really a science. And it's kind of just like, it's kind of like just what we end up caring about. Right. And then once you kind of figure out what you care about, then that's when engineering comes in, where you kind of are trying to configure these parts in a way to achieve some objective, or, whatever.
Goal oriented.
Yeah, or it's like, you run the algorithm on a computer. But yeah, I mean, that, piece of that step, kind of step zero, is like up to us humans.
Yeah.
Can I ask more questions about this post? I guess if
Go
it's
for
all right, can I share my screen?
Sure.
I'm working through the click to copy code here. So this is the blog post, so that our audience knows what's up. So I'm going to Stephen Wolfram's writings and looking at the blog post that Willem is talking about his work on. And what's cool about this format is sort of you can click on any of these diagrams here and paste it into a Wolfram Mathematica notebook and generate the same output. Takes a second, but
Yeah, this one is long because we're generating a video, but yeah, maybe do like, or I don't know if you really want this one, but maybe try to do a
I
different
don't
one.
need to make the video. I just need to make the data only.
Right.
Stop this.
But I guess, you know, in the meantime, this also on the
Oh.
topic of mind blindness, right? You also can see that with cellular automata. Like, you know, are there certain kinds of minds, you know, whether they're human or not, where they wouldn't be able to even recognize any cognitive properties about cellular automata, right? Because I also think about this, like I think about this a lot about like how we create film, how we create this sort of illusion of motion, right? With digital cameras, film cameras, stop motion, all this kind of stuff. And what are you doing? You're taking these sort of quantized slices and frames and you're stitching them together to create a sense of continuity. And you're doing that just spatially also with the cellular automata. And I think there's an interesting thing about how those things can create the qualia, for lack of a better word, of motion, of dynamic, right? And this goes again, like if this thing was moving so slow, we wouldn't even be able to pick up on it, right?
Yeah.
And if something is moving too fast, you might just consider, oh, it's just chaos. There's nothing there. It's moving way too fast. It's a shooting star. It's dust in the air. There's not too much of there's nothing potentially cognitive or behavioral about it. But if you mess with the time scales, you'd be like, oh, wait, there are these sort of cognitive properties about the way they adapt and have dynamics with each other. I think Michael Levin gives an example of like gas particles or gases or something. I forget the exact example he gives, but it's also sort of an argument about this mind blindness thing. But there's some things that, given the right lens, would very much appear to be truly cognitive. And then you can potentially control that system, in that way. And I think at the end of the day, what we're really going for with all this stuff is we're trying to get control over a system. And so for certain problems, we'll create the field of mathematics, for instance, to control some of those things. We'll create the field of physics or chemistry or biology or behavior, right? I mean, how would we think about animal domestication, right? I mean, a good chunk of, I'd say a reasonable amount of human history had to do with our relationship with animals and the way we would interact and coordinate goals with them, right? I don't know, just a thought.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about that last point. That was but I mean, I definitely think that, like, you mentioned mathematics. I think a lot of, kind of like what humans end up doing is kind of like putting bounds on your reducibility and shaping it. So like, yeah, Stephen has done a whole book on metamathematics, and it's a similar kind of idea, which is, yeah, it's about, finding the slices of computational irreducibility that do things we want. And I also think, to your point about, what type of, or what kind of minds would recognize, like what kind of minds would find, game of life interesting, for example. I mean, I really think, I think what you're saying about like this speed or just change happening fast is definitely something we equate with kind of aliveness, and then patterns that just kind of repeat themselves or like just stay in one state are very boring and non-lifelike to us. Yeah.
Like I used to like do you guys know Adult Swim, the channel, right?
Yeah.
Adult Swim. Yeah, like do you remember they'd have in the commercial breaks, whatever, they'd have like just random footage of like a waterfall and they'd have the logo on there. Like for whatever reason, I was just really fascinated by why they did that. And for whatever reason, it also just made me think more about like things that you wouldn't consider as very complicated processes with some ability to learn and change. And then I'd look at stuff like that. I'm like, well, how would I get a waterfall to change and adapt? And I think across all these different skills about how would you actually get it to store information and apply it and learn and all these kinds of things. And Dugan, we had a good, I don't remember exactly how many salons back it was, but about, you know, the way you train materials, agential materials, as Michael Levin would call it, right? About how what sort of the minimal model of materials that could display a sense of learning or agency. Because, you know, there was actually, we had an engineer who was working on some human skin augmentation stuff that came on just the other day. And we got into the discussion about like where does technology kind of meet biology? And I made a point about something that if biology was solving a similar kind of goal and technology is trying to solve a similar kind of goal, which in many cases is how to be useful to us, it starts to eventually trend towards a similar direction, right? I mean, even our robots have, even our most kind of foreign looking robots still have similar aspects to known animals and humans. Now, the question is that if a robot-like system were to evolve on its own, would it still look the same? And then you can kind of go on the extreme end of that, and you would say, how would nature itself evolve like a silicon computer that's using silicon to compute, right? You could say, okay, everything is kind of computational, fine. But if it were to actually evolve its own kind of GPU or PCB, how would it do it? Like a mineral computer. Remember this one, Michael? And then on top of that, I don't think it's enough to just do that. I think it's also about, yes, technically nature did evolve a CPU. That is true. That's true though. That's true. And I want you to expand on that, Eli. But, you know, the other thing I think about as well is like, you know, think of a circuit board that can physically change itself, right? So yeah, there's things happening in the software. Obviously there's things physically happening on the circuit board, but what do you get? A self-learning adaptive GPU that's physically changing the circuits itself, right? Reconfiguring the circuits. When you learn as a brain, materially, the brain is changing. When you're training your heart, the heart physically changes. As an athlete, you probably know this. When you train your muscles, they're coordinating in different ways and they're literally physically restructuring. So could you get something completely new out of our computing paradigm by having hardware that starts to become more like software? Because I think biology is this sort of weird middle ground. It's not just software or hardware, it's sort of both, right? The material that you're using to compute the information is also physically changing.
Well, I don't know about the software hardware thing, but I definitely think that we do have cases of computers that can learn. I mean, that's literally what machine learning is. They're kind of adapting to the inputs that you give them. Now, I do think there is a distinction where biological systems tend to be more like fuzzier and complicated, less smooth. And I think like when we see objects that are kind of smooth and like very geometric, we kind of equate that with engineered systems. I think part of that is because the problems that biological systems solve are generally, it's much more broad than like, you know, when an engineer is building something, it's usually to solve a very narrow problem, whereas like an organism is kind of, I feel like much more of a general kind of construction, and it needs to be able to do many things. And I also think it's a difference in the way that the system is built. So most of the time, you know, biological organisms for the most part are using like or evolution is kind of using like rough heuristics for how to quote unquote construct the system, right? So like there's recombination and like, yeah, but an engineer I think has much more sophisticated inputs and outputs. So they're like, they can visualize the system and then like make very planned or, you know, well thought out decisions about the design of the thing. So I think that is another kind of thing that leads to different looking kind of systems.
Right. And actually, so Eli has had some good comments on that stuff if you want to hop in.
Sort of. Wait, I was like 80% engaged, but I just saw your comment. And is it about the self-healing material stuff? Like,
No, I was
this,
I was kind of briefly going on the self-healing stuff, but I was just looking at the comments you've been leaving the last couple of minutes, and I wanted you to
oh yeah.
expand on it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's so more philosophical here. I mean, what is the start? And like, it depends on what you've like set up, initially.
The
Like
initial,
right now, we evolved silicon CPUs because humans made them, but then there's a lot of other things like extending that same idea. Um, if you design any biological system, but like an AGI just does it perfectly, and like, or maybe that's something in motion that it will evolve correctly. I mean, does it matter? Like, and if that doesn't matter, then I also would argue it doesn't matter that, you know, the distinction between some kind of system that could actually natively evolve a silicon CPU versus, humans made it. Like, I feel like the distinction isn't practically useful yet. So I could be open to, someone arguing the other way.
yeah. And by the way, feel free to get as philosophical about this, because I think good engineering is applied philosophy in a lot of ways.
Absolutely.
And
I love
Michael,
to. Go ahead, sir.
oh no, go ahead.
Yeah, I love to just like put my philosophy into all my code. It's like, no, my data model is like very difficult to use unless you align your philosophy with this idea.
Wait, actually, hold on. I'm curious about that. So, because I think a lot about um alignment, not just sort of AI alignment, but just alignment and coordination of systems in general and how they communicate.
Yeah. So I can't make too many comments because it relates to proprietary work stuff, but I actually am in a position where I'm allowed to make a lot of comments about that. So at the privacy thing I made at Transcend, I was kind of given like full agency, full autonomy to first figure out if it's possible, and then to second, how to design it. And I made it so that the systems that encode rights for people are aligned in a certain way that you can't make a bunch of bullshit like use cases where it's like, oh, I want to reset things that probably wouldn't be reasonable to reset if you move around the world. And just a lot of encodings and how things are stored. I know I'm being super vague here, but it just makes it really difficult to be bad to your users and in a rights enforcement system per se, where, I mean, we're not your lawyer, and yes, you can do literally everything. It's Turing complete, but it's about setting up data models that it makes it less efficient to do things I don't like. And then in the end, everybody just adopts the least friction path. And when this goes back to practical economics, practical society, end result is people who buy Transcend software end up, even if they're bad people, being better. So when I go to websites that use Transcend's like privacy stuff, I can just shut off parts of my brain that are like having to worry about this bullshit. And I love the end result effect of just like these simple decisions, like very early on in engineering when creating like new products and thinking about how you can affect, much deeper state stuff. And some of these other deeper things is my tool also makes it so websites don't need the tracking banners, so those annoying things. It goes really deep. If you'd like to learn more about the specifics of the goals of that privacy tool, I don't make money from you Googling this, but it's really interesting. You should check out Google Transcend Consent Manager. There's like a Vimeo video that we have that's like 20 minutes long about how we created it, what ideas I was like trying to create. And essentially that annoying paradigm that we have online right now of going on a website that's not your website, and then running some other person's code and then being assaulted immediately against your attentions, like close banners, accept things that you don't give a shit about because you Googled for the site to read the content. And this entire paradigm of how you interact, it's like a battle essentially, and it doesn't have to be that way. So I made it so the site owner has more power and control over the mess of third-party components that pretty much you can only run them immediately and they violate some laws. So you just like, okay, I'll ask users for the ability to hurt them right away and make it really annoying. What my thing lets you do in a kind of sketchy, but it's a really interesting sense, is it lets all these trackers run without consent, but then captures the emissions that wouldn't be allowed to be sent out. And then just automatically upgrades the experience for all those shitty trackers. You let them run, the user doesn't have to bother, and then during like checkout or whatever, when the user is going to convert, you can ask them stuff like, do you want to share that user journey that we don't have but has been collected in exchange for monetary compensation, all those kind of things? And then people feel like their privacy is valued. And if you go at it from the status quo, everybody's like what I call beg clients, just sharing your shit and begging people not to do anything with it. It's just, there was no way forward. Everyone is so ingrained in like the status quo that nobody really thought, how do we start again? So yeah, I was like, oh yeah, offensive security. We can't start again. It's actually too late. You're gonna make a new layer on top of this trash heap, and we'll figure it out. And that was my in real life application of some of these principles to a real commercial product. And it's also quite successful. So I'm happy that it turned out that way.
That's interesting. So I guess one of the things that my head immediately goes to on these things, right, is well, on one hand, I was thinking about privacy from a philosophical, computational, cellular automata perspective. Like, what is privacy system? And the way
I
it
have a
evolved.
lot of, yeah, I also want to talk about that too at some point. Just sorry.
You want
Yeah.
to hop in on that? Maybe you and Willem can go back and forth on that one. Maybe.
Yeah, maybe a future dialogue, but like I feel like
Yeah.
once we have whole brain emulation architectures and we're not even running on our own computers and it's all homomorphic encryption and interaction protocols and no human rights because you want to be able to change. I had a really in-depth conversation with Stephen Wolfram 2 weeks ago about this. He was at the Internet Archive, and it was so
Is this the
interesting.
one with Yosha? Was this the one with
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wish
Were
I
you
could have
there?
been there.
Wait, are you based in SF? Yeah. He was so nice. Like honestly, he stayed until 11 talking to us. Like and then he had the most goated ass saying, "Oh yeah, I try to get to sleep before 2 a.m."
It's true. He's like that. He's working right now.
I love
guarantee
him.
it. He's working his
Yeah,
ass off
he's
right
so
now.
cool. It was really nice. Just like I would just shoot in the shit about like, how do we make verifiable, physically auditable whole brain emulation architectures where we're not running the actual physics sim because you die in a physics sim and it's not as efficient, but you can use the physics sim to help audit your representative models. I got a lot to talk about, but in the end, when it comes to privacy, security, and ownership, you have like public servers, you have whatever servers are for running existence, and there are obviously multiple computers and latency hiding, but the architectures of rights, the like baseline of what runs on these systems is so fundamentally interesting to talk about. And the attack models and security constraints are they're just so wild, and I love to just pontificate like all night about that stuff. Because yeah, I know we need homomorphic encryption if you're not on your own computer, but there's even more.
So what do you mean? What does homomorphic encryption mean?
Well, to be able to run a not entirely auditable mined architecture on someone else's computers, that does hopefully give you some privacy, I guess. It's not entirely, but it's super vague, and this is why I don't want to talk about it right now. I want to like write up some stuff about like how I would approach this, and it would be an awesome Ekkolapto talk. I mean, I've never really I don't do these often, but yeah, I mean, I'm kind of interested.
What was your conversation with Stephen about then? Was it about this thing?
It was about the architectures of how we create these to begin with, once like while we're creating them, like how fine detail these brain scans have to be, how we evolve the architecture and like go through creating these whole brain emulation architectures. And he also gave me a bunch of pointers about Eon systems, though as a competitor I can't go too deep into some of their stuff, but they don't have much stuff to go into. So I'll be there about that. But yeah, it's just honestly, it was late and me just spewing my bullshit about things I've written up for books that I want to write.
You should get on that, man. I think these would be really cool books.
Oh yeah, I like started this like ages ago, and it's just a lot of effort to make a real good book that you actually care about, like that you would put your name on and step behind.
Well, that's important. You're putting a big aspect of yourself into this thing, and you want it to be sort of the prime product. Like this is the final piece. This is cream of the crop. I totally respect that. Well, I guess unless Willem, Dugan, or Michael wants to chime in with something, I was gonna also make some connections about. I think a lot about like we talk about diverse forms of minds and diverse forms of problem solving. I think of diverse forms of, cryptography, privacy, diverse forms of viruses, diseases. How do diseases and viruses and biological systems translate over to, computers, but then all just other kinds of minds and systems, AI, whatever it is. And that also brings to the idea about like prompts. And actually we have a professor, Dr. William Hahn, who talks a lot about info hazards. He'll be talking a little bit about that on Monday, actually, with Andres from Qualia Research Institute, which is going to be fun. But no, so something I think about is, I think the sort of this idea of, at least philosophically for me, cryptography is like, you want one kind of observer to see one thing and another kind of observer to see something else. So they could be looking at the same thing and they're seeing two different things, right? One person doesn't, it's sort of like if you're in certain social situations, if you network a lot or you do whatever, it's like there's certain things that you just don't realize until you've learned about it, right? Until you have the context for it. Right. Like, so, sometimes like I was a friend that was telling me instantly about like, he learned a new word, right? This new word. And now he hears it everywhere and he never, ever recognized it before. Right. It was there. You can look at old recordings of things. The word was used, but the mind does not pick it up and is not receptive to it unless there's some.
Isn't there a phrase for that? What is that phrase for when you start to see it everywhere after you've heard it once?
I forget what it's called, but
it's
once
funny.
we know the word for the phenomenon, we'll see it everywhere, like we're seeing it right now.
No, that's literally what I was gonna say. It's like we're all gonna start seeing that once we say it.
Yep. I don't know. I guess it's sort of related to like pareidolia type of stuff in to a degree. But the other thing also is I think about like sensory illusions. So auditory illusions, optical illusions. Actually the logo of Ekkolapto is a Necker cube. It's a cube, right? And if you look at it, it's a shape, it's a cube, but it looks like it's switching perspective multiple times, right? It looks like it's switching perspective multiple times. And then, is it facing left, right, up and down, inside out, whatever, right? Some people can even see they can see it in 2D, not even as a cube, but as like a sort of diamond surrounding a square or whatever. But the crazier one is like the audio illusion. So there was this famous one years back about, what was it, brain needle or green needle and brainstorm, right? So the sound is the same. The sound is not changing. Both two people can hear the same sound, and yet they can hear completely different things, right? Now think about what you're doing when you store information and you're trying to sort of hide it away, right? There's, if you're in, you're in some situation where you need to send a private message, right? You're sending something that looks like a signal to someone, but then it sounds like some other signal or noise to somebody else. And this happens perceptually, naturally, as it is. Dugan, you made some comments here.
Oh, it's just seeing what that name for that effect was.
Yeah,
So, Vader mind.
Interesting.
No,
Yeah, it's
or
such
AKA the frequency illusion.
I feel like the amount of syllables and just length of that phrase helps protect it from itself.
Yeah.
Yes, but no, I do think about like the way, in a lot of ways, I guess you could say, if you literally look at virus in biology, right? How do viruses learn? When you have a computer virus or whatever, the point is that, okay, you find a way to get rid of it or whatever, but as long as there's some other system behind the virus, it'll find a way to adapt and grow. That's why there's something called the cybersecurity industry, right? But how do different viruses store their information, especially if we don't technically consider viruses to be alive? How is the evolution of viruses happening as they move from one organism to another, right? And I think about this in the future in like a sci-fi way, about like agential viruses that are almost more like living things than not, right? And what does that look like? Because this also, I think, ties into the idea of thought forms. In fact, actually, hold on. I think that's the name of Michael Levin's website or his blog. I think it's Thoughtforms, like thoughtforms.blog or something. But yeah, like I think about point is if you have you could say you could target different systems by collecting data on it. How do biological viruses collect data? And how do they spread the data to other? Like what does a hive virus look like where the viruses are able to communicate with each other? And it doesn't even necessarily mean they're like technically truly living things, but they can still find some way to indirectly communicate with each other, right? I just saw a video the other day of like, did any of you see this on Twitter about like the worms acting as like a swarm? Did you see that?
Worm?
Hold
I
on,
have
I'm
not.
gonna find this link. Hold on, I'm gonna find this link.
I don't know.
I saw it, I believe it was on Twitter just the other day, and there was these tiny worms that were basically clustered together and acting as almost one unit. Right now, how are they all acting in unison with each other towards this thing? Right now, think about what that looks like for a more advanced, computer virus or biological virus. Right? Viruses are actually used to deliver certain things to biological organisms for good purposes, right? Because of the way that they can sort of slip through the cracks in the walls. And so
similar for computer exploits, I wouldn't call them viruses when used in a good
right.
way. I mean,
Right.
I guess you could still, but yeah. Actually, no, absolutely. There are actual viral fix campaigns from good agencies where they find everything's being exploited by one hacker, and they're like, okay, we'll use that same exploit to send the patch to fix. But yeah, interesting.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're describing sounds like an artificial virus that is more capable. I think that seems possible to me, and it's scary.
Yeah. Yeah. And my professor, Dr. On, he actually has a whole thing he's working on artificial immune systems. It's actually sort of been a project for a while, but the idea of artificial immune systems. So artificial immune systems in that, okay, like the immune system of the mind in the way that ideas propagate, spread, adapt, grow, whatever, but then also like literally an artificial immune system for different kinds of robotic systems, right? As robotics gets more and more advanced, and also because it's trying to solve similar problems to what biology tries to solve in nature and sort of the way it tries to control itself and adapt and whatever, is there's going to have to be probably at some point some kind of robotic immune system. And I think whatever we learn with how AI responds to certain viruses and develops its own kinds of viruses and those things, I think that those are going to be very applicable. Curious your thoughts on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the equivalent of a robot immune system, as you're calling it, I think it's going to look really different, because it's like, obviously, if the thing is just made out of whatever metal, it's not going to have the problem of having viruses enter it. It's going to be more like mind viruses, similar to like computer security problems, I think. But yeah, trying to figure out when something has gone wrong, so let's say you have some whatever humanoid robot, and it's trying to figure out when it should shut itself down. I think that's a challenging, like computationally irreducible problem, similar to like trying to figure out, as the immune system, what cells are cancer and what cells are normal. It's going to be like a ongoing battle, just like how the immune system is always fighting cancer, I think.
I think for robots, when it comes to physical immune systems, it wouldn't be like the abstraction breaks down too much, and it's going to be the same system as the maintenance system. I'm assuming it's like you have a weird fancy robot that you can take liquids and it can repair parts on the inside with. And imagine it gets some type of internal damage. It's the same type of issue as an intentional, contaminant added. I doubt the types of problems would be like, I don't know if immune, or maybe immune just becomes all encompassing. Like their immune system is their circulatory system. If we're talking about physical, not the brain parts, so not any computation, but there is problems and they can be entered, and you could throw a bunch of nanobots into it and maybe have it dunk up things, and yeah.
Yeah, I kind of think that that's not going to be necessary, like you're saying. I think the analogy definitely breaks down. It's going to be more like fighting against mind viruses, I think.
Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
main concern for sure.
So what would be a mind virus then? I mean, some system of thoughts that one thought or system of thoughts that comes in and like takes over.
Yeah, and is it a mind virus if I just trick you with like plain language? Like, is that a virus because I changed your goals like to an effective degree that caused the robot to misbehave or do something bad? Separate from like
that
actual
would be-
software flaws in the interaction protocols, like way higher up.
Yeah, I think like
You're
it's
you're
kind
talking
of
about for artificial system.
Yeah, like, and then is a meme a virus for humans too? Then, like, what is
Well,
I
yeah,
think it's,
have to
if
be.
The mimetic stuff.
memes? Yeah, memes that would like, I guess, not just change your opinion, but they also kind of make you want to spread the meme. I mean, I guess that's what memes are. But basically, social manipulation that persists across multiple humans, especially when there's lack of information or something where something's being held back so you can't really know something. I feel like there can be really dangerous memes in that sense. And does that make them a virus, like that an actual like immune system needs to react virus? And I'm not talking about human immune system, by the way. This is more that
Right. No, you're talking
theoretical
about like
mind one. Yeah.
propaganda, for instance, comes up.
I guess it's propaganda, but that's kind of a subset of this type of like meme.
Yeah,
Like,
it's
he
an
doesn't have. Yeah, but
example.
yeah, I get you.
I mean, another thing that comes to mind is like, a religion is it's like an ethos, it's a set of thoughts, and there's also a propensity for it to replicate itself. That is like, for instance, for Christianity, let's say, there's a sort of ideal of like it's this good thing if you're in and you're a believer and you have like your soul saved and you have like positive uh, emotions and feelings about being aligned with God and being being a good person, and you want to spread that to others to save their souls as well. So it's this ethos that has a propensity to spread based on its own like internal structure of beliefs, that it's like in there as a core of, you want to proselytize, you want to evangelize, you want to spread this religion. And so after like a long time of human history, it's like the religions that have a propensity to keep replicating are the ones that we're dealing with now. The like a set of thoughts that someone might have and say like, okay, I have it, and they don't like spread it, it doesn't get spread. So just
Yeah.
on the topic of replication, because that's necessary for viruses as well.
And you almost have to question, at least on the religion and cultural aspect. Like I was talking to someone the other day about like, what are the structures that end up thriving for the longest periods of time? Well, what are the systems that last the longest time? Well, it's not the human, it's not the organization or the company or the business. It's not even necessarily the language. It's a culture. Like, we have very, very old cultures that are still here today and very prominent all over the entire globe across humanity. And that literally changes the way you physically read things, the people you're friends with, the people you're not friends with, the people you marry or the people you have kids with, the people you work for or you don't work for, the goals, the things that you consider important. These are very, very large scale communication systems. And it's interesting that it's found survival and not single people, but in something more emergent almost. Like, it's not necessarily just the parts, it's something else besides the parts that survives throughout the sort of transience of the parts, which is interesting. And then I think about just in general is about like, is there virus usually has a negative association with it, but is there a way a virus can actually be a beneficial thing for the organism? Right, Michael, this will take me to the hormesis and robustness thing. But on one hand, you could say, at least in the case of a mind virus, is that there's viruses that, okay, you like, or there's a mind virus, that's something that's spread where this is specifically propaganda, whatever. And it's not even that you necessarily have to be taught that. it's just sort of implicit based off of something else out of it. Like, you don't have to necessarily be told that this is dangerous information or propaganda. You don't even have to necessarily be told it's that to understand that, right? There's like transfer effects there. But then the other thing is that, can you have viruses that are neutral? They spread, they're using you to spread, but they don't cause any issues. And then can you have viruses that spread that are actually beneficial, right? And then beneficial can go into one, how they spread, but then also, can it be something like endosymbiosis, where it actually becomes a synergistic relationship with the other organism? Sort of like what we say about our microbiome and the mitochondria.
I definitely feel like they're going to become important, whether they're good, bad. I mean, good, bad, intent, all of that is so relative. Your freedom fighter is my terrorist. So like, I don't even try to assign these kind of values at all to any viral actions. But I do think viral action is quite important as we ossify extremely durable physical systems of like control, governance, actuation of like actual like, as we create transit systems. That's everything in the future is going to like have weird AI stuff, automatic maintenance. Like, things could get extremely durable, and then if it's ossified, who knows if a bad decision just becomes extremely hard to fix. And that's where like persistent viral processes can be kind of like wholesome. Could you link to the Monday thing? I don't think I signed up yet, and I probably should subscribe to your calendar. Yeah.
All right, I'll link it right now. 1 second.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Oh yeah, and it was also nice meeting all you. I saw Michael in the last one.
Oh, absolutely.
Willem, I haven't met you yet, so cool to meet you. These
meeting
are
you
recorded,
too.
so I am physically unable to turning on my camera because my whole vibe online is there are no photos of me. So
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you're with 3 other members of the Wolfram Institute. They're all very smart people. You should totally get in touch with them offline as well. See if you have anything interesting to talk about with them. And I did just link the QRI thing on the chat.
I got it. Thank you so much. And it's nice meeting with all these Wolframers. Is that what you like to go by?
I like that.
Yeah,
All
That's good.
I like it.
I don't know if we have a proper term.
At Transcend, we have Transcendentists, and we own .transcend.dentist.
Nice. I like that. I like that.
Yeah.
Really cool. That's pretty cool. I like that one. Props for that. That's neat. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't come up with it, but yeah, I think it's pretty funny.
It's cool though.
And
I
also,
like that.
I mean, the name of the company is like, I'm a little upset because I want to make an AGI lab that takes over the universe, and they kind of took over the word Transcend already. So yeah.
Oh, I like the name. That's cool. But yeah, Willem, any last details, things you want to promote, talk about, tease for the next one?
No, just I think people should check out the the post that we were talking about. I assume you'll link it in the description or something.
Yep.
And then we're working on more stuff now, obviously, but it hasn't come out yet. So.
All right. Awesome. Thank you everyone again for this. We have many things that Ekkolapto is cooking up. I actually have some of you already know about some very good news that was recently relayed to me, and that will be very, very good for the Ekkolapto community. That will be announced shortly. But then in terms of things coming up that are announced, we have the Engineering States of Consciousness with Andres from the Quality Research Institute, along with Eliade, who's also from QRI, and then with Dr. Han. And then actually Dr. Barinholtz is also joining in for that one. Then we also have Stephen Gupka. Michael, you'll know him from our center, who's going to be presenting on human relationships and interactions with AI and computing. We are working on an engineering phenomenology weekend retreat in South Florida, most likely this summer. It's going to be entirely focused on enhancing cognition, at least in humans. That's it's almost like a more technical meditation retreat with a bit of philosophy and some other stuff in there. That one's going to be a lot of fun. And then other sort of things in the Ekkolapto orbit is obviously Augmentation Lab. I think I've already told all of you about that. They're based in Cambridge. The residency starts in, I don't know, about just a week or so. Very, very smart group of people. Very cool. I'm fortunate to be one of the members of the lead organizing team. And I'll have that link also in the description for everyone to check out because we'll be doing different kinds of events with them online and in person. And then another member of the community is Luca Del Deo. He's running the Future of Meditation. This is on June 26th, also in Cambridge. Actually, Andres is actually going to be a speaker for that remotely as well. Some cool stuff, getting some AI and meditation people together, sort of a way of bringing computational sciences and cognitive exploration together. And then there are some other really big projects that I have not yet announced or made the page for, but lots of cool stuff happening this summer. These next couple of months are going to be full of things online and in person. So I can't wait to talk to everybody next.
Yeah, thanks for the lowdown and all that. Useful.
Of course. Yeah, and as well, because this is growing, please, anybody feel free, if they have any ideas, feedback, criticisms, suggestions, feel free to, message me on Twitter or talk to me on the salons or cool.
Cool.
Yeah, I can
Awesome.
follow you. I'm gonna do that after this. All right.
Perfect. All right, yeah, I'll put my my thing in the description actually. 1 second.
Ekkolapto.
Cool.
All right. Cool.
Wonderful.
Well, see y'all.
All right. Y'all, take care. Thank you. Peace.
Bye for now.
All right.
Have a good day, everyone.